My name is Noelle Baring, and at my father's fundraiser that night, I didn't exist. Not really. I stood near the back wall quiet, in full Air Force dress blues, the creases pressed so sharply they could have cut glass. No one noticed. Or rather, they noticed just enough to avoid eye contact. The servers were more polite than the guests. The scent of champagne and ego drifted through the air, and the whole room sparkled like a crystal eye. My father, Martin Baring, rising political star, worked the crowd like a maestro, shaking hands, offering that campaign-perfect smile. When his eyes landed on me for half a second, he gave a nod so slight it might have been a twitch. Then he turned away. No recognition, no warmth, just a non-event. My cousin Troy didn't bother hiding it. I saw him point at me as he leaned toward my Aunt Colleen voice, low but loud enough to carry. "That's Noelle," he said, chuckling. "The one who plays soldier. She's just a medic." They both laughed. So did my father. That one stung more than I expected. Not because it was new, it wasn't, but because I had thought just for a second that maybe being invited meant something had changed. I should have walked out, slipped away like they always wanted me to. Back into the shadows where my absence was more convenient than my presence. But before I could move, the energy in the room shifted. A hush rolled across the hall like a cold front. The heavy doors opened, and the crowd turned. The President of the United States had arrived. Flanked by Secret Service, he walked in with the gravity of a storm. My father lit up like a child seeing Santa Claus. He edged forward, clearly, hoping for a handshake or a photo. But the President didn't stop for him, or for anyone in the line of power suits and glittering donors. He scanned the room slow, deliberate, until his eyes found mine. There was a pause. Then he asked loud enough for everyone to hear, "Is that her? Is that Major Baring?" Every head turned. Even my father froze mid-smile. And just like that, the room finally saw me. I wasn't always invisible. Or maybe I was, and I just didn't know it yet. Growing up in the Baring household meant learning early what kind of success mattered. My brother Lucas figured it out right away. He was made for their world clean-cut, quick-witted, always knowing what to say to make adults beam with pride. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. I didn't rebel. I just didn't fit. While Lucas recited mock trial arguments at the dinner table, I was sketching anatomy diagrams in the margins of my homework. I once brought home a science fair ribbon for designing an improvised field medic kit, and my mother barely looked up from her laptop. "That's nice, honey. Did Lucas get his internship?" By the time I was 17, I had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. I wasn't bitter, not then, just tired. Tired of chasing approval that was never mine to catch. So when college acceptance letters came, I did something that made my parents pause, but not in the way I hoped. I told them I wasn't going to Stanford, that I was enlisting. My father laughed, out loud. My mother looked like I'd just confessed to joining a cult. "Noelle," she said slowly, as if testing whether I was serious. "You're going to throw away your education to join the military." "As what a nurse I want to become a combat medic," I replied. "Air Force, pararescue training." My father's face hardened. "Why would you waste your potential like that? You're too smart to be a grunt." That word, grunt, it landed like a verdict. I remember standing there in the kitchen, the cold tile under my bare feet, wondering how saving lives had become something to be ashamed of. They didn't yell. They didn't disown me. They did something worse. They moved on. Lucas got a new suit for his first law firm internship. I got a pamphlet about deferred enrollment just in case I came to my senses. But I didn't. I passed selection, made it through the pipeline, and every time I was dropped into a mission zone, every time I stabilized someone under fire, I told myself this matters, even if no one back home sees it, especially if they don't. It was in that silence years of it that I learned how to hold myself up, but I'd be lying if I said I never wanted them to look. Just once, just really look. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished a debrief after a multi-casualty evac in Kandahar when my promotion orders came through technical sergeant. It had taken 8 years more deployments than I could count, and a stack of scars, both the visible and invisible kind. For a moment, I let myself feel proud. And then I did something foolish. I picked up the phone. I called home. My mom answered, her voice bright and composed like always. "Noelle, darling, how are you?" she asked like I was calling from grad school instead of a tent 7,000 miles from home. "I've been promoted," I said. "Technical sergeant. There's a small ceremony next week. Nothing fancy, just base protocol." There was a pause so short it could have been a glitch. "That's great, honey," she said. "We'll certainly try to be there. Try." That word echoed like an old injury. I spent the next few days pretending it didn't matter. I polished my boots. I rehearsed standing at attention. I didn't even ask again. But the night before the ceremony, the truth came anyway. She called me. Soft voice. Careful tone. "Noelle, I'm so sorry, but we won't make it. Lucas? Well, he didn't make partner at the firm. He's devastated. Your father and I are flying to Chicago tonight. He really needs us right now." I stared at the wall phone pressed to my ear, the silence roaring like static. Lucas didn't make partner. That was the emergency, not my promotion. Not the years of service, the lives saved, the mission survived. My achievement was an asterisk. A footnote they'd skim past in favor of their real investment him. My mom didn't notice the shift in my voice when I said I understand. She just thanked me for being so mature. The next morning, I stood in formation on a wind-swept tarmac, my name called by a commanding officer who knew nothing about my family, but respected everything I had done. The metal pinned to my chest felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, but because no one I loved had come to carry it with me. That night, I opened an old notebook I used to keep during training. At the top of the first page, I had once scribbled a quote in shaky handwriting. "They may never clap, but you still get to dance." It wasn't enough, but it kept me standing. Because when your family builds a house where you're not welcome, you learn to become your own shelter. My father's annual fundraiser was held at the Lockwood Club, a place so pristine it felt allergic to fingerprints. Every year the same crowd arrived, lobbyists in sharp suits, socialites in tighter dresses, old money and new ambition swirling together under chandeliers imported from Vienna. And this year, for some reason still unclear to me, I was invited. I almost didn't go. The invitation felt more like an obligation than a gesture of inclusion. But something in me, the same stubborn flicker that had carried me through late-night triage with broken tools and failing light, told me to show up. So I did. I arrived 15 minutes early, the way I was trained, in full dress uniform, ribbons in place, boots shined, hair tied back into the regulation twist I'd done 1,000 times. I didn't expect a red carpet. I didn't even expect a hello, but I wasn't prepared for open mockery either. From across the marble lobby, I caught Troy, the same cousin who once cried when I beat him at chess in 4th grade, leaning toward my Aunt Colleen with a crooked grin. "She looks like she's about to recite the Pledge of Allegiance," he whispered. Colleen laughed. "She still insists on wearing that uniform like it means something." Troy smirked. "She's just a medic. You'd think she saved the world or something." I stood motionless, not because I didn't hear it, but because I heard it all too clearly. And then I turned to my father. He was standing close enough to have heard every word. He glanced at me, then looked away, offering nothing more than a strained smile. Like this was all harmless, like I was being overly sensitive. That's when I felt the old ache in my ribs, the familiar hollow that had formed in my teenage years and never quite healed. I turned toward the door. I was ready to leave. I didn't need to endure this again. I had survived far worse in places where men bled for inches of dirt. But something shifted. It began as a hush, a change in the tone of the room, like the moment before thunder. The doors opened, and suddenly, every conversation died. The President of the United States walked in. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't posturing. He was moving with intent, flanked by agents shaking no hands, stopping for no cameras. I watched my father straighten his tie and step forward, his face practically glowing. But the president didn't even glance in his direction. His eyes scanned the room once, twice, then landed on me. And then, in a voice that was clear and unmistakable, he asked, "Is that her? Is that Major Bering?" Every head turned, every glass paused midair. The air left the room. I stood still. And in that moment, I wasn't the medic. I wasn't the burden. I wasn't the disappointment. I was someone worth looking at. And they all finally had no choice but to see. After the room exhaled and the whispers began, a man in a slate-gray suit approached me quietly. His steps were precise. His expression unreadable, more field operative than staffer. He introduced himself with a nod. Senior aide to the president. Major Bering, he said in a low voice. The president apologizes if that put you on the spot. He was told you were here and wanted to acknowledge your role in Operation Ilex. The name alone stopped my breath. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud since the mission debrief. Most people never would. The aide continued without waiting for a reaction. Your leadership during that recovery, under fire, with limited resources, was noted at the highest level. The asset was critical. The situation, near impossible. Your decision-making likely prevented a diplomatic disaster. He paused, then added almost gently, the president would like to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross. There will be a private ceremony at the White House next week. Just a few key people, if you're willing. My pulse settled into a cold, quiet rhythm. It wasn't adrenaline, it was something sharper. I nodded slowly. I'd be honored, I said. My voice didn't shake. He began to turn away, but I stopped him with one question. Would it be possible? I let the silence sit a moment. Would it be possible for my family to attend? He blinked. Your family? I gave a measured smile. They've been so supportive. I think it would mean a lot. To them. The lie came easily. The aide studied me, just for a second, like he was trying to see behind the calm surface. But then he nodded. We'll make the arrangements. When he walked away, I stood still, not triumphant, not vengeful, just clear. I didn't want them there to impress them, or punish them. I wanted them there because some truths are so vast, so undeniable, they have to be witnessed. And because nothing cuts through a narrative like reality in uniform. So I sent the invitation, one each, to my father, my mother, my brother Lucas, and yes, my cousin Troy. The same people who laughed. The same people who said I was just a medic. Let them see what that meant. Up close. In a room where no one could talk over it, spin it, or pretend it never happened. The West Wing doesn't feel like history from the outside. It feels quiet, almost unassuming. But the moment you step through those doors, everything changes. The room they let us into wasn't large, but it had weight, mahogany panels, a seal inlaid into the floor, portraits lining the walls, presidents' generals' faces etched with decisions that changed lives. My family entered behind me, one by one. My father wore a navy suit 2 shades darker than his campaign posters. He glanced around with a detached curiosity, as if trying to appraise the room like a real estate listing. My mother clutched her handbag too tightly, her movements small and nervous. Lucas stood with the practiced posture of a man used to dominating boardrooms. And Troy looked like someone had just told him they canceled happy hour. None of them knew why they were really here. I hadn't told them about the award. I hadn't told them anything at all. They assumed I imagined that I had pulled some strings, maybe leveraged a contact. Maybe I was still seeking approval. Let them assume. A staff member asked us to stand. The doors opened. The president walked in, followed by 2 senior officers, one from the Joint Chiefs, the other in full service dress. And for the first time since childhood, my father didn't look like he was in control of the room. The president didn't stop to greet anyone. He walked straight to me, took my hand, then placed the other on my shoulder and said, Major Bering, thank you for coming. I've wanted to do this for a long time. He turned to face my family. I asked them to be here today, he said, because it's important they understand exactly who you are. And then he told the story. Operation Ilex. A downed helicopter in hostile terrain. A CIA field agent critically wounded. No radio contact for hours. And me low on supplies, pinned down injured. He described how I stabilized the agent using only a flashlight and a field kit. How I coordinated air support on a damaged comms unit while holding off a local militia for 6 hours. He described how I refused extraction until the asset was airborne and safe. When he said my name, full rank and title, it rang through the room like a verdict. Major Bering is not just a medic, he said. She is one of the finest examples of courage and resolve our military has ever seen. This nation owes her a debt. Then he stepped forward, opened a small velvet box, and pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on my chest. The metal was heavy, but not as heavy as the silence. I didn't look at the president. I looked at them. My father, whose mouth was half open, my mother pale, Lucas fidgeting like his tie was suddenly too tight, and Troy hands clenched at his sides, unable to look directly at me. The president nodded. Major, would you like to say something? I took a breath, turned toward the row of stunned faces, and said simply, I was just doing my job, sir. That was all, but it shattered the last illusion they had left. Because for years they'd dismissed what I did as small, peripheral, not worth applause, and now, in the most powerful room in the country, they were forced to listen to watch as the truth stood before them with ribbons on her chest. They had spent a lifetime trying not to see me. Now they couldn't look away. The car ride back from the White House was the quietest hour of my life. No one spoke. The silence was thick, almost tactile, like the air itself was too ashamed to move. I sat in the passenger seat of my father's black town car, staring out the window as the city blurred past in streaks of gray and gold. It was my mother who finally broke. Her voice was light, too rehearsed. We're so proud of you, Noelle." She paused, waiting for something. I didn't respond. My father cleared his throat. That was remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Lucas didn't say a word. Neither did Troy. Their words weren't apologies. They were Lifeboat's flimsy, last-minute attempts to stay afloat in a reality they never expected. But the tide had already gone out, and I wasn't standing on their shore anymore. When I got back to the base the next day, there was a small envelope tucked into my locker. Inside was a handwritten note from the president's aide thanking me again for my service. Below the signature was one sentence. For what it's worth, they looked shaken. I folded it once, then tucked it into the back of my journal. 3 days later, my mother called. Her voice was syrupy sweet, like she'd just decided none of it was real. Your father and I were talking, she said. We'd love to host a little celebration for you. Just a gathering. Family, friends, press some of your old schoolmates maybe. People should know what you've accomplished. It's incredible, Noelle. I let her speak. I let her try to rewrite the ending. And when she finished, I answered in a voice that felt stronger than I remembered it being. No, Mom. I don't need a party. She went quiet. I could almost hear her blinking. Then I added calm, and even I have to go now. I'll talk to you later. And I hung up. There was no drama, no yelling, no final confrontation, just a line, drawn cleanly. That phone call didn't make me angry. It made me free. Because for the first time, I wasn't chasing a moment, or a nod, or a seat at their table. I didn't need to be celebrated in their house, not when I had stood in a room where the truth was undeniable and finally let it speak for me. 1 year later, I wasn't in a marble hall or behind a podium. I was standing on a training field in Arkansas, my boots covered in dry clay, watching a young recruit fumble a tourniquet under pressure. I had transferred here after my final deployment, taking a position as lead instructor at the combat medic school. It wasn't prestigious. No headlines, no photos, just heat-sweat repetition and truth, and I preferred it that way. Out here, I wasn't the daughter of Martin Bering. I wasn't the soldier the president honored. I was just instructor, or ma'am, sometimes major. And for the first time in my life, those names felt like enough. We trained them hard because one day, they'd be the only thing standing between life and death for someone far from home. Some of them were confident, most were terrified, and all of them in their own way reminded me of who I used to be. One afternoon, a trainee named Graves froze during the casualty drag. His partner had slipped the dummy, too heavy, the sun too hot. I could see it in his face he was about to give up. So I walked over, quietly. No yelling. You don't have to finish the whole course right now, I said. Just pull 1 inch. He stared at me. Then he moved. 1 inch. Then another. Eventually, the whole body cleared the line. He didn't thank me. He didn't need to. The lesson had already landed where it needed to. That evening back in my office, I opened my locker and saw the medal case still sitting where I left it after the White House. I hadn't touched it since. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my father. It was a photo of the Distinguished Service Cross, professionally framed, mounted beside Lucas's degrees on the family's home office wall. The caption read, "The centerpiece of the collection. Everyone who visits asks about it." I stared at the image. No heat rose in my chest. No anger surged. Just quiet. He still didn't get it. To him, the medal was a trophy, a symbol of proximity to something meaningful, a way to signal value he never truly understood. But that medal wasn't his to hang. It belonged to the mission no one saw, the voices I steadied under fire, the lives I touched with shaking hands and absolute resolve. I deleted the photo, not out of spite, but because I didn't need the reminder. That night, I walked to the fire pit behind the barracks. Some instructors were swapping stories. Someone handed me a dented mug of coffee. The sky was full of stars, real ones, not the painted-on kind my childhood ceiling once had. And in that moment, surrounded by people who knew what it meant to carry weight and never boast about it, I finally exhaled. They had called me just a medic. But here in this quiet corner of the world, where truth didn't need framing, that was more than enough.